Welcome. In this video, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing Michael Doran. Michael has a storied career as a corporate recruiter. He's worked for over a dozen high-growth VC-backed companies, including some that scaled to multi-billion-dollar valuations. Now, Michael's the CEO and co-founder of TeamSourced.com. After years of working in the recruiting industry, Michael knows better than anyone some of the unique challenges that people in that role face. And he's worked to solve those problems with his new platform, TeamSourced. It was an awesome conversation, very inspiring. There was a few moments that hit home in a real way. There was a lot of laughs as well. Michael's got an awesome way of weaving in principles and life lessons with humor. I encourage you to watch the whole thing. Michael is a wealth of insight and provides his wisdom in an accessible way that's relatable to anyone, regardless of your career field. So that's it for the intro. Enjoy the conversation. I give you Michael Doran. Michael,
Logan.
good afternoon.
Afternoon. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Likewise, I've been looking forward to this discussion. The first time we connected, you struck me on multiple fronts. One of which was your domain expertise and your background, but the other is how many times you're able to weave in a serious knowledge bomb and humor at the same time.
Thank you. That's high praise. I appreciate it.
Percent, man.
Yeah. Like, as I was telling you right before this conversation started, I am an extrovert who leads a global team full of introverts, and I'm also father to 3 kids. My wife works full time in the tech industry as well, out of our house. And so I have a lot of people around me who don't really listen to me. And so I appreciate the opportunity to extrovert, as we're just about to bring our new platform online and take it out of beta and relaunch it. So I'm starting to get out into the world a little bit more because I've been kind of in heads down building mode for the last few years.
That's exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, perhaps we could set a flag in the sand, an anchor point into the current moment, and you could illuminate what that looks like. You've been head down building for a while now.
Yeah.
You're on the precipice of a pretty significant launch. Uh, you want to break down some of the pieces to that? What's at that forefront of your head as you're moving into this?
Yeah, well, it's just interesting because it's kind of the culmination of my recruiting career in so many ways. It's I don't know. I came up in recruiting and in business in general throughout the entire digital revolution, right? Like, you have to understand I'm actually Gen X. I'm a little bit older, though I don't necessarily look it, which I find to be helpful. But in general, like, I kind of joke sometimes, like my first applicant tracking system at a company was one of those manila file folder holders that you would just put your different folders in. And so I was literally recruiting pre-technology. I then jumped into large companies and was working with very early large enterprise systems like Brass Ring and Taleo and things like that. And I excelled generally because I wasn't afraid of technology, like so many people, both in my generation and the generations preceding me, were and still are. I've always just naturally loved technology. I was drawn to it. And then I was actually got into a recruiting position at a hot internet company right as the first internet bubble burst. And then from there, had to figure out kind of like my recruiting career forward as I started getting rejected because I was a tech recruiter and people needed someone with experience in different kind of other areas. So that's also ultimately led me to where I am today. I've been out in the Silicon Valley area for the last 10 years. For the last 3 years, I've been running my own recruiting services business. We provide essentially sourcing services, embedded recruiting teams. We provide contract recruiters that we back up with free sourcing support. Only company in the world to do that, by the way. It's my innovation. And we took a lot of our knowledge, and while we were working with a lot of high growth companies like Discord and like Bolt and Oyster, we built our own SaaS platform to make it easier for individual recruiters and teams to do a lot of collaboration work at the top of the funnel. Ultimately made it with a couple goals in mind. One, if nobody ever buys it, we've got a solid technology platform that we can build a services business off of. And two, ultimately wanting to give something back to the recruiting community. Uh, so many people who are building technology and recruiting essentially are kind of like engineers and other people who are in various positions around Silicon Valley who've been frustrated with recruiting and technology and are like, I'm going to start my own company. But they haven't necessarily been recruiters for 20 years, or just even for a couple years in a lot of cases. And they're still ultimately building technology for the enterprise. And so team sourced, and we're going to actually rebrand that as teamhire.ai, is actually kind of my love letter back to the recruiting community, because it's going to be a freemium model. We're going to give away the Chrome extension. We're going to give away access to the web platform and a certain level of functionality that will allow an individual recruiter to be able to start building their own database of talent and to be able to engage that talent with kind of multi-stage email sequences.
Michael, why is it important for recruiters to have their own database?
Data mobility for individual contributors in general is a really important issue that nobody is talking about. As someone who was a contract recruiter for 20 years, I can't tell you how frustrating it is, because you start to get into natural rhythms, especially when you're working in technology. And the common example that I use is that I would spend a couple years, let's say, working for a tech startup in Python Django world, right? And then next thing I know, I'm over at Bolt, where I was their first recruiter, helped them grow from 15 to 250 people. And they were a heavy Go back end, and the front end was React, and they were using TypeScript, and they were, specifically using Kubernetes for their infrastructure. And then, I would then go to another company and I'm back in Python Django world again. Well, traditionally, all I can bring with me from job to job to job is my LinkedIn network. But my LinkedIn network doesn't even tell me what day I connected with somebody on. And it doesn't give me any context around it unless I spend money to LinkedIn for their pretty expensive and doesn't really give you much but additional access to all the profiles. Right. And I just saw a need. Like, I think now, if I had the platform that we built, even in its infancy now with where it is, if I had that when I came out to Silicon Valley 10 years ago, I would have a record of all my sourcing and outreach during my time at Google and Dropbox and Sensor Tower and Bolt and Nexmo and all the other, companies that I've worked with. And ultimately, what I think a lot of recruiters are going to find is, once they get a certain amount of data, and they're able to segment that data, and they're able to get insights out of that data, they'll be more able to build their own business and to maybe begin to service multiple businesses at once, as opposed to just being a contract recruiter or a full-time recruiter. And that will ultimately give them more stability, because that's what we did over the last few years during the pandemic. We built a relatively successful recruiting services business up until the economy started to really drop out, which was about May or June of last year, and which is now just starting to come back around just a little bit. So what that means, though, is I just watched David Sachs at SaaStr talking, and quite a few other people online, is it seems like we've hit the bottom, and that we're going to start to hopefully come back up, and there's not like a greater recession in the future, which means that we'll see a lot more recruiters going back to work. And those recruiters will now have the opportunity to kind of start anew and have their own killer tool that's free, or even if they want to pay for it, won't cost them that much money. That will allow them to have a lot more functionality, be able to engage people with multi-stage email sequences, and be able to really slice and dice and kind of segment the data the way that they need it to be segmented. And we're just getting started. We still have to build integrations with all the applicant tracking systems. We have a lot to build out and a long way to go, but I really see a lot of potential. And it's ultimately came as a result of our blood, sweat, and tears. And we've been paying for the development of this out of our own pockets by providing recruiting services for the last couple of years. And yeah, we're really excited to be able to bring, what we've brought out into the world, and really give a lot of value to people and allow people to get, a lot of value out of a tool right away for free.
The data mobility, it seems like that would have a benefit not just for at the individual level, but also for the organizations that they're serving.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. It's kind of my dream at some point that people will put the size of their team hire network on their resume, because there's certainly data sharing agreements that could be very interesting, and that could even allow individuals to be able to market themselves more effectively in terms of their abilities and impact to make an effect on a business in a faster way. And so I'll expand a little bit upon that. For most of my recruiting career as a contractor, I think generally I was up to speed. Probably when I was younger, it was 45 days. And then after I had a few contracts under my belt, it was probably 30 days. And then, it's funny when I talk to people who've been in business a long time and people who've been around longer, there's this old adage, and it's absolutely true. At 15 years, you start to know what you don't know. Anybody with less than 15 years of experience, generally, there's a lot they don't know, but a lot of times they don't even realize that they don't know what they don't know, which oftentimes can kind of be a kiss of death with the tech business if you don't hire the right people who aren't humble and willing to embrace what they don't know and be open to learning, right? If they are, then they can overcome that delta really quickly. But if they aren't, then it can be kind of like a hidden blind spot.
I think you're discussing a point that's a natural segue into team alignment in the remote era
Sure.
we're living in, the hybrid and remote era. You are a business owner. You've worked with a number of executive teams, leadership teams to source people, to build teams.
Yeah.
How do you think of team alignment in an operational level in this remote workplace that many of us are living in?
Yeah. More than ever, cultural focus in your hiring is probably going to be an important quotient for both the people hiring and the people who are being hired. I think more people need to be comfortable with maybe saying no to opportunities, which is really, really hard to do, especially in this economy. And probably isn't really realistic in this economy, but certainly as the economy comes back, and if we get to a period of time where there's a lot of growth like there was in the last 5 years or so, at one point, I was pretty desperate for a job, and I was offered a full-time job by a company down in the kind of the South Bay. It was a bit of a drive away from where I would have to live, and I would have had to drive down there every day. And I could kind of tell that I was maybe their second choice. It just wasn't getting a lot of love from them. And then all of a sudden I had an offer, but that offer had a hard accept date. And I wasn't excited about getting the job. And I remember calling my wife. This was actually, yeah, right before I got Bolt, which changed my life. I remember calling my wife on the way home, like, well, like, it looks like I got the job offer. And she's like, you don't sound excited at all. I'm like, well, it's going to be a really long commute. And it doesn't seem like they're even really into me. And it's just been a janky interview process. And she's like, no, just don't. Just something better will come along. Just don't. And I was like, really? Like, that would be amazing. Like, are you sure? And she's like, no, don't. And then, like, sure enough, I ended up getting a contract at Bolt at a pretty high hourly rate. Probably like a few weeks later, they were just a bunch of young, really bright, really smart people who really quickly built like an $11 billion business. They're also a little bit controversial. Not everybody likes them, but you can't really argue with Ryan Breslow raising $1 billion like in 4 years. Like, it's pretty amazing what they did. And what I really loved about Bolt the most, one, which, and I'm going to put this out there, I think the top startup perk in the future is psychological safety. One of Bolt's core values was be 20% wrong. If you weren't 20% wrong most of the time, that you weren't working enough. You weren't working hard enough. You weren't trying to think outside of the box enough. You weren't experimenting enough. And to finally, after 10 years in the Valley, really get into like that type of tech startup. Because like when you're outside of the Valley, you hear about these tech startups like Facebook and stuff, and you think they're all the same. Like, they're not all the same. Like it's like anywhere in life, like every single business is a little mini fiefdom that's made up of the personalities of its leaders. And you do not know what you're going to get until about 3 months in, when the sheen of you is worn off and the expectations on you has set in, right? And so what I really loved about Bolt was, they wanted people to be 20% wrong. They saw that I was action oriented from the very beginning. I was up to speed at Bolt within 3 days. I started taking phone screens my first day off of the COO's plate. Once he saw how quickly I was able to do, he dumped all of his phone screens off of my plate. And then I was ultimately able to convince them to hire my wife. I brought her in. I was able to get her back into the working world. They were open to people who had been out of the working world coming back in and working with them. They were just super collaborative, and they were super open, and they were not set in their ways. And I was able to train her to be a Google Bar recruiter. She's now the founding recruiter at Community Phone, which is a really fast growing startup that's in the actually the telephone space. They're part of the whole getting rid of the analog POP systems and going digital. And she's been helping them grow for the last year. And so working together at Bolt, I was able to really train and teach her, and they gave me a lot of flexibility in seeing what all the different offerings. Very often, I was really kept siloed and compartmented, which is okay because I'll do my cog part of the job really well. But if you can give me overall insight and allow me to be a little bit more strategic, I can add a lot more value. Bolt did that early on. They spent, I think, $300,000 a year, or not a year, $300 a month, 2 months in a row on agency fees. And I generally, because I was a contract recruiter, agencies were my enemies. If a contract recruiter, if you have to start working with agencies, you're probably on the way out. You're not getting the job done. Now they got to spend 5 times as much from some agency that they could have just worked with from the beginning to fill a role. So I quickly always worked to get agencies out of any businesses that I was working in, and just to handle all of it myself. And so at Bolt, they really allowed me to be flexible. They had a very high spend in agencies for a couple months in a row. I said, let me see what I can do for you to get you out of this. I built up a system with their applicant tracking system. It was Lever. It was built by some Google engineers, and they had a really great two-way Gmail functionality in it that essentially allowed you to send as any email that authenticated with the system. So I could do all of my outreach as my hiring managers. And that leads to like a 95% open rate and a 25 to 30% response rate. Because in recruiting, people don't want to hear from some random recruiter. Okay, they want to hear from the hiring managers. That's what I learned at Bolt, right? And I was super successful. I got to the point, and this is a good factoid for any founders out there listening. At my world-class best, I was doing 35 to 40 phone screens a week, and I was sourcing and reaching out to 2 to 250 people a week with personalized outreach. I was working 55 to 60 hours a week, and I was absolutely crushing it, and really helped Bolt to grow rapidly. And the way we structured our process, we did a pitch for every single person we talked to. It was great word of mouth marketing. It really got the word out to the entire tech community about who Bolt was and what they were doing. And ultimately, it just allowed them to become a very successful business, and it got agencies out the door. And then as I left Bolt, I realized most companies use Greenhouse or other ATSs, and they're not using Lever. And this functionality that I had that made me an Olympic track star, I now don't have. And in order for me to get that, I now need to spend $2,000 a year with Mixmax. This is not achievable for the regular person in the middle of America who maybe has been a recruiter for 12 or 15 years and thinks about starting their own business, but doesn't quite know how they can do it or even afford the tools to do it. And so I realized that in there was also an opportunity. So we spent, a number of years working with other third-party software. We landed clients. We landed Discord as a client with Mixmax and spreadsheets and Google Sheets. And we were with them for almost 2 years. While we were building our original MVP, we built about 2 or 3 different platform iterations before we were able to find a contract architect to work with. He was one of the original architects for the police portal for Ring. And he came in and built out a really, really solid kind of like engagement platform that you can create multiple workspaces in so that you can service multiple clients and have multiple integrations in each workspace. And so it's just one overall kind of central hub for all of your sourcing, all of your outreach, and all of your engagement. And over time, we really want to turn it into the central hub for where recruiting activity happens, because it's something that's affordable for every recruiter out there in the world. And that all came out of working with Bolt, right? Because we saw how effective that technology was. That technology was locked inside expensive SaaS platforms. And even, the technology that's been taken out of those platforms and put out there is still expensive itself, and it's still being marketed to the enterprise, and people are not necessarily focusing on the individual contributor, which comes full circle back to your original question about why it's important. It's because if you have data mobility and you're able to take more than just your LinkedIn profile or from job to job to job, you can become more valuable. Right? If you've worked for a company for a couple years in a technology stack, and then you go work at another company and you've been on the Team Hire platform, it's teamsource.com now, but we speak future tense, right? And you're on the Team Hire platform, you can essentially say, I have all the sourcing I did. I can dump those into a new workspace for you, authenticate my new at startup.com email, build an email sequence with AI. I can re-engage those people the first week. Right. And as a recruiter, that just makes you way more valuable. And then over time, you can realize, wow, I could just work remotely and maybe service multiple businesses at once using this platform. Oh, and I can actually engage with international talent like we do. We work with people in South America. We pay them to the 80th and 90th percentile. They're able to live very securely. They've got a lot of stability, and they work really, really hard for us. And then we can provide a lot more affordable services to our clients. It's like a win-win-win. Sorry, that was a long tangent.
I'm following you. Something you talked about a moment ago regarding the metrics when you were just machine mode at Bolt, 55, 60 hours a week,
Yeah.
doing an insane amount of output.
Right.
Speaking, I like what you said, to the founders out there. There's another question I have, and I think I would imagine a number of other founders do as well, about the part that comes after the hiring. What have you seen? And you talked about psychological safety. I think that's just awesome.
Yeah.
What have you seen that after the recruiting process, similar to um, acquisition for customers, the fulfillment has to deliver on the promise that you made in your marketing efforts to have retention. What have you seen is the right next steps after the immediate hiring process to keep that talent engaged and to verify that it was the right fit in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great segue into my absolute favorite topic in the world, which is the importance of building a talent framework into your business. So I
Nice.
think what really what sets companies like Google and Dropbox and Discord and like really the world-class companies that I've worked with apart is that they've taken the time to really build frameworks around how they evaluate talent, but then also where that talent maps into their business, and where that talent um, like what levels it maps into. What does it look like on the levels in terms of skill set, ability, experience, and knowledge? Right. And the thing is that I've actually created, and if anybody wants a copy, you can just hit me up at michael@teamsource.com, and I will send you a copy of a talent framework that I've created myself that's essentially taken a lot of what I saw at Google along with what I saw at Dropbox and has synthesized it into a smaller, more efficient, startup friendly format. But what it does is if you build a talent framework into how you identify and evaluate talent, you can then use that framework in performance management and development of the talent, right? So when you have a talent framework built and you've got your company trained on it, when your hiring manager gets into a meeting with the recruiter, they can just be like, okay, so what level is this? I see 3, I see 4. Well, I really think they need to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and okay. Well, I mean, according to this chart here, that's really an IC5, and here's the comparable pay band. Is that what's in your budget? I mean, right there, a recruiter is doing probably 95% more than most recruiters have ever done. but you can't be an internal consultant. You can't be any type of consultant if you don't have data, right? Like you got to be able to really dial in on what's important and what's needed. And ultimately, it's up to the leadership of the business to give the structure to the business that it needs to grow. Now, I'm sure most CEOs and founders will agree with that statement, and they'll say, but Mike, I don't have time to build that in. And I say, hey, that's great. It's your business. Do what you want to do. But you wouldn't build your platform, your product without figuring out what the tech framework around it's going to be, right? Are you on Ruby and Rails? Are you Go? Are you on Rust? Right? Like what type of infrastructure are you working on? Are you on Google? Are you on AWS? You make these decisions around the product that you're building. And you should make these decisions around the business that you're building as well. Because yes, it takes more time on the front end to build it, but you know as well as I do that if you take the time on the front end to build a solid foundation, then when things get crazy, you've got a system that can support you. Because the way it is now in most startups is they hire a recruiter when it gets to the point that the founders are frustrated and don't have enough time to do it and they need someone full-time working on it. That person is brought in and they're asked to work on the top 3 to 5 most important priority roles, and then they are on a rolling rotation of decisions and learning and mistakes for the next 6 to 12 months until, depending on how strong a leader they are, they can get them to slow down and come up with a more strategic plan, or they eventually hire someone who's able to do that. Right. And so if you're the leader of a business, you should take the time to build a talent framework that's aligned to your company's competencies that are important to you. Because and this is the most important part of the talent framework, is that every company has values and they say they hire to the values. Okay, but what does that mean?
Yeah.
What interview questions align to your values? Oh, you use ChatGPT and this and that. Okay, sure, great. But with a framework, you identify competencies. You figure out what competencies are most important. You tie those competencies to the values. And then once you have those competencies, then you can go to ChatGPT and I've actually done this and taken other companies' work that's been around forever that they've made a ton of money off and said, hey, ChatGPT, give me a Gen Z friendly, more conversational 10 questions related to this competency, right? And then boom, 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 boom. And then you can start picking and choosing and you can build out your own. And I've done this, so I'm happy to give this away for free too to anybody if they want to contact me. I can share a copy of it with you. So once you accept that you need a framework, you decide what your company's values are, you keep those short. There's this thing called the rule of 4 at Google. I've got it in my competency framework document that I'll share with anybody. The rule of 4, you can Google it. It makes a lot of sense. It's about streamlining things. It's about focusing things. It's about focusing on the competencies. It's about hitting people up with different questions at each stage of the interview process around those competencies so that you can essentially gather the most data that you can while you have the person so you can make the most important decision that you possibly can. A really great analogy to this, I sold cars at one point in my career back when we were in another really bad economic downturn and I was not able to find any recruiting positions. I sold cars for a brief, short period of time. And what you learn is when someone's on the lot, you have a finite amount of time to get the absolute maximum amount of money out of them that you can do, which I was actually successful doing just by being professional, not like someone needed a fear essentially. And so I kind of view the recruiting process the same way. We have a finite period of time with somebody across a number of different interviews, and we want to get the maximum amount of data points. And so we need to have a really focused interview process around these core competencies aligned to this position and this function within the organization. And we build the questions that we ask so that we never ask the same question more than once. And so that at the end, when we have a debrief session and we bring everybody together, we have the maximum amount of data available to us so that we can make our most informed decision.
I'm following that. That's I'm following that. It's
Hard learned, hard
awesome.
earned, and it's yours for free.
I can imagine.
Hard learned and hard earned, right?
That's cool.
But I saw some amazing
Question,
conversations at Google, really. And,
Michael,
you know,
before, just quick question though. I'm sorry to cut in. Just before we get too far away, there's just a jump that was made a minute ago, and I didn't follow you on that one piece.
sure.
You're saying people say that they hire for cultural alignment.
Yeah.
And then you moved into the talent framework and having competencies squared away in a really focused interview process to extract as much data as possible from the interview process that informs decision
Yeah.
making. But I didn't track the leap from understanding our culture into defining the competencies needed for a role
Well, yeah,
into the
you've got to
interview.
go through a list of competencies and figure out which competencies align best to your company values. That's like a key component to building your talent framework, right? Because it's like, for instance, when I was at Google, one of the core values is being googly, right? I worked there for a year. I asked dozens of people, hey, what's the definition of googly? Now, I read Stephen Levy's book, In the Plex. The definition of googliness is somebody that I think was it Sergey could spend 5 hours in an airport lounge with. Not a single person at Google told me that. Like, it was like, oh, someone's googly is like they went to MIT and they play the violin and they have a purple mohawk. Like, you hear the wildest things, right? And so, that's why Google's having problems now, and they've really retracted. And they need to go back to their basic roots, right? One of their core basic roots, and one of the reasons I admired them for the longest time, was when their head of HR brought a couple of really early people in and they were deciding on what the company values were. And they were doing it much too late. I mean, they were already like Google at this time. And I think one of the engineers said, don't be evil. And everyone's like, yeah, don't be evil. Don't be evil. And that was honest and transparent and true. And that blew up. And that like became what Google was known for. And over time, as they grew and became a super huge, large bureaucracy, they lost that and they moved away from that. And I think when they did that, they lost trust, right? And that's going back to your core values. Keep them smaller, keep them focused, stay true to them, because your people do pay attention to them. Like, probably the best value that has made an influence on my life and that I've carried with me was one of Dropbox's. I don't remember what all their core values was, but I do remember sweat the details and everything else will fall into place. And I carry that with me in my work, right? I sweat the details, right? Like, it's taken us a lot longer to build our platform than maybe it's taken other people. We're bootstrapping it. My services business fell apart. I had to lay off almost my entire team except for one engineer. We kept pushing through and persevering. And and as I really become a product manager this year, I've really focused on that sweat the details, right? And there were some core functional bugs in our platform that people were like, yeah, I can deal with it, but I just wasn't satisfied with it. And those are gone now. And we have a stronger foundation, right? And so I think that's tying back to your original question. Why, if you're a founder, you should really contact me and get a copy of my talent framework. And I'd be happy to sit and talk with you and share the best practices and knowledge with you. And consider building a talent framework into your business right from the beginning. Because when you get busy and when you need to grow, it will support you and it will support your people and it will keep the most important parts of your business, which are those people, aligned and focused on your core mission and believing, right? Like, there's nothing worse than when somebody stops drinking the Kool-Aid at a job because they start to see the realities for what it is and that they are not who they say they were to be. And I'll leave this with my own personal example. When I left Google, I became I became a global talent acquisition manager. I finally achieved my long-term goal of becoming a recruiting manager. I was a global recruiting manager. It was the hardest job I ever had. My boss and I battled a little bit. And at one point, a leader in the company said to me, we need to get rid of the core values because it's too easy for our employees to hold us to account. And as they said that to me, I said into my head, our core values are what brought me here. And at that moment, a little piece of love that I had for that business died. Right. And I think that too often when businesses become successful and the people leading them become successful, they stop focusing on those little details. And I'm telling you, yeah, it may not come back to bite you, but it's like technical debt. It will still, it'll build up over time, right? Maybe you'll never have any negative repercussions from it, but maybe you ultimately start hiring the wrong managers. Maybe those managers start building their own little kingdoms. Maybe they start creating a really politicized environment. Maybe they start causing people a lot of real mental health issues and anguish. It is very easy to leave a negative wake behind you. And so that's why I encourage anybody, when you think about hiring and recruiting, that you really think about what is it that your business needs to be able to support it, so that you, when you get busy and you can no longer be involved in the day-to-day, because that will happen to every founder, you will have to trust the people that you brought in below you to carry on hiring. And you need to make absolutely certain that they understand what that looks like. And that's why businesses like Google and Amazon, Amazon, they call it bar raiser. Google, they call it like it's like just a cultural, it's the cultural interviewer. And those people have automatic veto control if they feel that the person coming in doesn't align with the company's ethos and the company's culture, right? It's because they've learned those lessons, right? If you look at some mistakes that Amazon made, was by ultimately realizing that they need to have a directly responsible individual. That's something they do at Dropbox as well, or like an executive in charge. They ultimately, every initiative, every project, there is somebody who is in charge. There is somebody who's accountable. There is somebody that the leadership can bring into a meeting and say, give us a status report on what you're working on, right? Because it gotten to the point where this person, there's person saying this person, and shifting the blame around, and that doesn't work, right? So businesses, if you're lucky and you're successful, your business will start to grow and expand. They say traditionally, it's like when a business is on that upward curve, every 6 months, you're hiring people to take over your job as you're moving up. So that's why startup teams often try to find the best people they can for the early individual contributors, because those people will become the leadership of the future. And if you do that and you have a talent framework supporting your identification and you train all those leaders on that, then as your business grows, you can feel a little bit more assured that they are going to continue to bring the right people with the right values and the right focus and competencies into your business to help it make successful and grow.
Very insightful.
Thanks.
Very insightful. You're a wealth of knowledge.
I've seen a lot. I was a contractor for 20 years. I've ranged from early stage startups to huge multinational corporations. I went into Pactive at one point, which I don't even think is on my LinkedIn. Honestly, I took it off. It wasn't that big a stint, but it they had been taken over by a private equity firm, and they had laid off the entire recruiting organization. And then after a while, the hiring manager started complaining. They brought a contract recruiter in who could kind of spin things up for them, and that person was me. And that was absolutely fascinating because I got access to this entire recruiting drive that had it was like an archaeologist, like going in to explore where it had fallen off, just like the initiatives that they had undertaken and the work that they were trying to do. Really taught me a lot in terms of being realistic about executive expectations, There's like a system out there that's sold by a really well-known company, and I'm certified in it. And I went through a whole 3-day training period with it with a whole bunch of HR people. And for me, it was like a beautiful mind moment. And I was barely sitting down and I was pacing around the back of the room, like thinking and talking and bouncing ideas off this instructor, and all the HR people were kind of side-eyeing me like, who the heck is this guy? Because they were just, their company sent this to them and this is how they're going to do it. And they're going to incorporate this and follow the rules that they set up. But to me, I saw that there was brilliant insights into it. But ultimately, when I tried to implement it, it was because it was built, it was the same system that I had seen at Pactive. Um, it was expecting too much out of the executives, and it wasn't, it was too expansive and convoluted, and it needed to be streamlined and simplified. And it ultimately comes down to competencies, right? And that's where the competency equation of the talent framework that I've put together comes from. What I put together isn't anything new. It's just a synthesis of a lot of different information put into a more streamlined format, right? And it's just like, great. If you take the time to build this into your hiring system and you take the time to train your people on why this matters, like one client that I have who I installed this, trained everybody. They left me for a year. I came back, it was still installed in place, and I jumped right back into it, and we are rocking, right? And they are
Nice.
aligned, and they view it as a force multiplier for their business. And it's a beautiful thing to behold, right? And even then, like the system I built for them is still probably a little convoluted and can be streamlined a little bit more. Now that I have AI, I'm starting to see where I can streamline it a little bit more, make it a little bit more efficient. But in general, yeah, it comes back to the competency piece, right? Like it's like what competencies are important in the people that you're bringing in to your business, and then aligning that to our, cultural, which I think a really big component of cultural should be emotional intelligence and self-awareness. I would say when I look for people, that's probably, I always know when I can find. In fact, I just pushed someone forward with a client this week because the guy said in the middle of the interview, it's been really hard to get an interview out there. It's a really tough economy, and I've been really excited for this. And I realized like a lot of his flubs were just overexcitement, and I didn't hold it against him. Right? I'm like, okay, I'm going to discount that, and I'm really going to focus on what has he done, what can he do, and what are his abilities, and then is he mission aligned with the company that's reviewing him, right? And that's the most important part. And when you do that, you can identify hidden gems. Like I'm telling you, it's not always the people who are best at selling themselves are sometimes also the people who are best at their jobs, but very often they are just people who are really good at selling themselves.
Hmm.
And that's really prevalent in technology, um, where people are in the right age range, they are in the right culture, they say the right things, they have the right things on their resume, they have the right things on their LinkedIn, they say the right things in the interview. And then when they get into the job, they cannot do the work. And then when you hire a person like that, especially in California, that can set your business back 12 to 18 months, right? Because you won't really figure out the person's bad until about 6 months in.
Hmm.
9 months in, you definitely know, and you're thinking about pimping them out. And then they need to go on a mandated mental health break, and you've got to pay them a certain percentage of their salary for a legally designated period of time. And now you're on the hook for that, and and they don't have to work anymore, right? And so that's why hiring well is really, really important. And it's why it's worth the time to really think about building a talent framework into your business, and then letting it evolve with every debrief session. How's the framework working? How are the questions working? What changes do we need to make? Any process, I think, needs constant iteration, right? I think you need to be reviewing all of your processes. Are they still working? And I think if you've not reviewed your processes and your documentation since AI came out, that you've got some extra work to do because it will make them better.
You're swimming upstream now from the post-hiring process, and you've anchored us into the importance of the talent framework
Yep.
and some of the structure of that. I think it'd be really cool to get into that, and there's undoubtedly more to unpack. But you swam back to the hiring process in and of itself, how it's connected to the talent
Well, yeah,
framework.
because if you have that talent framework, and if you really build the talent framework out where it's like IC1 through IC5, M1 through M5, and maybe executive 1 through executive 3, right? And you say, this is the knowledge they need to have, this is the experience that they need to have, right? Well, then you've got something that when your managers are having meetings with their employees and they're like, I've been working with you 18 months, I've got this job down. What does the next level look like? Let's go to the talent framework and look at that. Oh, well, look, I mean, you're in IC3 and you're doing all of IC4. Wow. Wow, Logan, you're doing half of IC5. Logan, I'm sorry. We've been busy. It's clear that you are well overdue for a raise and a promotion by the looks of this. How does the title lead sound to you? And let's bump you by 15% to make sure that we get you into the right range for an L4. And then when you do the rest that you don't have on I5, we'll get you there too. And that could be in the next 3 to 6 months. That's what people want. Okay? It's really freaking simple. We do not need pinball machines. We do not need in-office kombucha. I mean, that stuff is nice. I've seen it all. When I was at Dropbox, they had a Michelin chef there. They never served the same meal twice, which kind of sucked because some of the meals were really, really, really good, right? But like that was like the ethos there. I can't tell you what pleasure it was to work at Dropbox. But after 9 months there, I was like only working 30% of the time and bored. And I was a contractor and I was just in a narrow lane. That's what they wanted, and that was fine. But I wanted more. Right. And we're coming into a new world. I think generally people want to work from home, but they want to get together. They want to get together maybe once a month if you're regional, or maybe more than that if you're local, certainly more than that. If you're regional, maybe having them come in a couple times a week, or if they're a farther drive, maybe having them come in for a week once a month. And other than that, if I could afford it, I would pull my team into an offsite every 3 months, and then I would not work. I would just spend time bonding and talking, and not like hard work, more like, hey, let's put things on automatic, out of offices on, and then let's really talk through things like the product roadmap, things like what our strategy is, and then what we need moving forward, right? And then if you do that and you give psychological safety and you take the time to build a talent framework into your business so that when you get busy, you know that you've got managers and leaders who've got people working for them, and those people have a clear idea of where they're at skills and experience wise and where they need to go skills and experience wise to move up in the organization. You will probably have to recruit less and less over time because you will have like no attrition, right? That's the goal, right? Zero attrition, like undesired attrition, let's say, because they always like to categorize that between desired and undesired, right? And that's the goal. Like recruiting's hard. Everybody knows that. Most founders hate it. Who can blame them, right? So let's not do it. Let's take the time to actually invest in our talent and our people infrastructure, right? What's the technology we use? How easy is it to use? And then even the structure of the business, right? You don't need a full recruiting department anymore. You don't need a big business anymore. Honestly, you need a really good senior recruiter, and then you need to give that recruiter a real budget and the ability to spend money as needed on services to support them, like team sourcing services, right? Which we offer monthly, and we start at like $2,000 for one role, and then we do all the sourcing. We verify every single email address, and we do all the outreach and the engagement using an email address or an email account that you give us and that you authenticate with our platform. And then we have all the messaging going out as you. That's why we built the platform the way that we did it. Because ultimately, what I learned at Bolt was that candidates want to hear from the people they're going to work for. Nobody cares about recruiters. I'm a recruiter for 20 years. I hate to say it. Recruiters often have big egos and they think that they're extremely valuable. We're not. In that context, we're valuable in the fact that if we're really good at what we do and we're really, really focused, we can support leaders and we can build their relationships. And at the same time, we're also building our relationships with the talent pool. But we're really putting the executives forward. We're helping to build their relationships with the talent pool. And then ultimately, will make recruiting easier over time, right? And if you have one or two recruiters that are supporting a company and then you back them up with sourcing services when you're in your high growth period, and then you can turn those services off when things start to get, usually at a certain point, August, things start to kind of level off. And then, like November, things start to level off for the rest of the year until you pick back up in January, February. You can augment, just bring services in for when you need them during high growth periods and then turn those services off when you don't need them. It'll be more affordable. It'll be more economical. You won't have to hire as many recruiters and do this whole hiring recruiters. And the economy gets bad. Let's fire all the recruiters. And now the economy is getting good. Let's hire all the recruiters. And then, you can hire a couple good recruiters. You can keep them for a long time, and then you can augment them with services to help them and not expect them to do everything themselves. There's no such thing as a full life cycle recruiter. And if you have a full life cycle recruiter, then you should regularly expect that your time to fills are over 30 days and are probably closer to 45 to 60 days. Do you want to have 2-week time to fills? Then give your recruiters access to services that can blow them up at the top of the funnel and let them focus on what matters, which is reviewing all the people who are responding positively, conducting telephone interviews, and coordinating those people with a great candidate experience through the rest of the process and closing them and converting them into new employees. Right? That's what an American recruiter should be doing. They should not be working at the top of the funnel. And if you're an American sourcer, and I'm saying this to you, I'm sorry, it's the nature of technology, it's the nature of a global workforce, but you're worth more than just being a sourcer. Because what I kind of posit is that in the future, a lot of companies are trying to eliminate recruiters altogether, and that is not the answer either, right? The answer is to allow American recruiters, to do the really high touch parts and to ensure really great candidate experience and to work internally with organizations, to develop interviewers, to refine and continue managing and developing the recruiting process, to find new partners and more efficient ways of recruiting and filling positions consistently, right? Sourcing is a full-time job. And with my company, we have people who just source. They are working on their Western English, but they can read English fluently. They might not be as confident speaking it. We invite them to client sync meetings if they want to come. We give them access to insights and allow them to be in the room, which oftentimes can be just as valuable as the money that they're receiving working from us. And so, in the future, you're going to see more. I think SaaS platforms are going to become more affordable. I hope that they're going to be more plentiful. If you take a look at OpenAI, I was part of the original group. I answered the original email when they asked how much people should spend. I said I'd spend $20 a month for it. That's what they came out and said it was going to be. And that's probably what the very intro paid level for our platform is going to be as well. And we're going to give you a ton of value for $20 a month. And we're going to make your job monumentally easier. And we're going to get you to the point where you want to upgrade to the $40 a month plan because it's going to give you open AI and it's going to give you a lot more functionality than you have. And then we have happy users and happy customers, and then they can use our software to build their own businesses ultimately and not be dependent on going from contract to contract to contract, and not going from job to job to job and always having to worry, when the economy goes south. Or, I mean, I talked to people who worked at FANG companies and their contracts were ended early because they were so successful. They met the needs of whatever the program was, and the full-time person most likely got a promotion, and all the contractors were let go. Right. And that's what needs to go. I've had that experience myself as a contractor, and it's one of the reasons I built a sourcing services business. Don't hire contractors. Hire us to do your sourcing. And when you don't need us, turn us off. And then I'll take care of my people. And I'll make sure they're happy, I'll treat them well. You don't have to worry about that. Sorry, you got me on a roll there.
Very wise.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about that. I've just seen a lot. I've seen good businesses. I've seen bad businesses. I've worked for great leaders. I've worked for insane leaders. I've worked for really poor leaders. And because for a long time I kind of called myself recruiting's master sergeant, because like I probably should have been a director or a VP at some point, but I also had a young family and I genuinely liked working from home. I like being around my family when they're growing up. I still like being around my family. I want to be around my kids until they're older. I'm already seeing the effects from that. Unfortunately, I took a hit on my career. I didn't dedicate myself to companies. I gave them my best effort, and I often gave them extra hours that I didn't bill them for, to bring it home. But I wasn't really into office politics, and I suffered as a result of that because I'm older. I kind of grew up in a different era of business than the era that we're in now, which is a little bit less politicized, office politics wise, yet it's still there. Because I've had younger people play office politics games with me, not knowing that they can't, because I literally was taught by the best generation at that. So we'll leave it at that.
What haven't we discussed that we should?
Well, we're at 55 minutes. I think that we've talked a lot. I don't know. I went off on a few different tangents, and I don't think I even told you a fraction of the stories that I could probably tell you. I think ultimately,
Tee us up for next time.
yeah, save it up for next time. I mean, ultimately, if you're even curious about who Michael Doran is after the end of this conversation, it's like, I'm the quiet kid that kind of got picked on when he was younger, that nobody really expected much from, that got kind of bullied quite a bit growing up, that then ended up turning into like a 6'5", 200-pound blonde haired dude that all of a sudden had a presence. But at the same time, I never got a college degree earlier. I had to get that when I was older, working full time and starting a young family, which is not ideal. And so I kind of got compartmentalized in an area. And I think that if you're watching this and it sounds familiar and it's maybe happened to you, it happens to a lot of people. Not every, oftentimes getting ahead in big corporations are a completely different skill set that doesn't necessarily relate to what it is that you do. And there are people who are naturally good at that. And then also a lot of times those people become really problematic leaders too. And I think we're coming into a new era. And I think that as you evaluate talent, I think that you should look for people like me who are really, really good at what they do, but maybe who are just an introvert, or maybe they're disabled and they can't come into the office, or maybe they're not quite as polished in certain areas. They're not really good at maybe managing up to you. You maybe have to dig in a little bit to find out what they're actually doing. But then if you take the time to do it and actually listen to them, find like a numerous value and insights. And that's really, I think, what being a strong leader means. It's not just raising money. It's not just being a big shot. It's not just telling people what to do. It's building an organization that's going to last. It's building an organization that's going to support you and hopefully generations of your family. But it's also about building a business that's going to support all the people that you work for. And it's going to develop them. And it's going to allow them to have a better life. And hopefully that will start with providing them with psychological safety and the ability to make mistakes and to not have to feel scared about making mistakes. I think that's a good place to end it on, because that's something I'm really passionate about. I think is the future of building a business. Let them be 20% wrong. Let it go.
Inspiring.
A good shout out to Bolt there. Thank you, Bolt. You showed me that I was a lot more than I thought that I was. And you pushed me into being way more. And I'm eternally grateful. In fact, if you look behind me, you got the Go West sign, which is something that my wife painted super early on when we were dating, when we lived in Illinois, and hated it. And originally wanted to move to Arizona, but then ultimately realized like it's a much more California looking painting. But the one next to it is actually a poster. Bolt used to have a designer, and they would have posters and they would put them up in their office. And it was for the new office's opening party. And so I got that frame because we really feel like we came out of Bolt. And Bolt is where we got our start. And so Bolt is always going to be close to our heart.
It's awesome.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
for sharing.
Yeah, thanks, man.
It's awesome. Very inspiring. Honored to have held the space.
It was
for you to
fun.
share
It
that.
was fun. Yeah, I'm happy to do this anytime you like. Like I said, I mean, to give me any topic and I can kind of expound upon it for a while. But I hope, I read a lot, I think a lot. And I think that it's time for people to really think hard about the businesses that they're building and the effects that they're having. And really focusing on trying to do some good in the world in every aspect, doing right by not only your investors and your customers, but doing right by your employees. It is a really hard time for people. And when people start growing again, let's be a little bit more strategic and thinking that when we bring people in, we bring them in for the long haul. And if we don't need those people for the long haul, then maybe we should look for consultants or services to supplement that during our busy periods and times. And let's give the people that we have working with us the psychological safety of knowing that their job's not going away as long as they keep working hard.
Michael, where can people get in touch with you?
Michael at teamsourced.com. You can check out our platform, teamsource.com. It is product led. It is free. It is in beta. We'll be turning the monetization on, but there will always be a freemium component to it. So people who use it now will still be able to access it in the future. Might just lose a little bit of functionality, but we'll make sure that we keep it affordable so that anybody can use it and anybody can have a solid tool to support them across their career.
Awesome.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Appreciate the time.
We'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, we'll do.